In the quiet suburbs of Willow Creek, I had built a life that many would envy. I had a stable job as a marketing executive, a lovely home, and a beautiful wife named Emily. We had been married for 7 years, and while the initial spark of our romance had dimmed over time, I believed we were still strong. But recently, I noticed something troubling. My wife had begun rejecting intimacy. At first, I brushed it off as a phase. Perhaps she was stressed with work or preoccupied with our 2 children. However, weeks turned into months, and the distance between us grew. We used to share everything, from late-night talks about our dreams to passionate embraces that seemed to last forever. Now, the silence between us was deafening. Emily often turned away when I reached for her, a gentle reminder that our relationship was faltering. One evening, after yet another unsuccessful attempt to connect, I sat on the edge of our bed, feeling a sense of desperation. I didn't want to believe that our love was fading, but it felt like I was clinging to a thread that was slowly unraveling. I decided to confront Emily about it. "Is everything okay? I feel like we've drifted apart," I said gently, trying to keep my tone light. She sighed deeply, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I'm just tired, that's all. You know how it is with the kids and work." Her response was vague, and I could sense she was deflecting. My heart sank as I realized she didn't want to discuss it any further. I wanted to dig deeper, to understand her struggles, but she seemed unwilling to let me in. As the days turned into weeks, I felt more isolated. I sought solace in work, often staying late to avoid returning home. I filled my hours with meetings and projects, but each moment away from Emily felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. The longing for intimacy grew, becoming a gnawing ache inside me. I was still attracted to her, still loved her deeply, but the rejection stung more than I could articulate. One day, during lunch with a friend, I poured out my heart about the situation. Jack listened intently, his brow furrowed in concern. "Dude, you need to do something about it. You can't just let it go on like this. Maybe she needs a little push to remember what you two used to have." His words echoed in my mind, stirring something I hadn't considered before. That night, I returned home with a new resolve. I planned a surprise getaway for the two of us, hoping to rekindle the flame that once burned so brightly. I booked a cozy cabin in the woods for the weekend, imagining us surrounded by nature, away from the chaos of daily life. When I presented the idea to Emily, her face lit up for the first time in ages. "Wow, that sounds amazing. Just the two of us?" she asked, her excitement palpable. "Yes, just us. No kids, no distractions," I replied, feeling hopeful for the first time in months. I sensed a shift in her demeanor. We set off on a Friday afternoon, the crisp autumn air invigorating us as we drove into the mountains. The cabin was rustic and charming, nestled among tall pines with a crackling fireplace and a stunning view of the lake. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I felt a surge of optimism. That evening, we sat by the fire, sharing stories and sipping wine as the flames danced. I leaned in closer to Emily, remembering the intimacy we once shared. But as I tried to initiate a kiss, she pulled away. "I'm sorry, I'm not in the mood," she said softly, her eyes cast down. Frustration welled up inside me, but I chose to stay calm. "Emily, we're here to reconnect. Can't we at least try?" I pleaded, trying to break through the wall that had formed between us. She looked at me with sadness in her eyes. "I know, but I feel overwhelmed. I don't know how to fix this." I felt a mix of empathy and irritation. How could we fix it if we didn't talk about it? But as I looked at her, I realized that pushing her would only create more distance. That night, we slept in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The next day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I could no longer sit back and watch my marriage crumble. I started making plans to regain my own sense of fulfillment. After all, I had needs too. I began flirting with the idea of seeking intimacy outside my marriage, thinking perhaps a new connection might reignite the spark I craved. While I didn't want to cheat on Emily, I felt an overwhelming urge to feel desired again. It wasn't long before I found myself chatting with a woman named Sophie online. She was vibrant, funny, and full of life. Everything I felt was missing from my own relationship. Our conversations quickly became flirty, and I found myself drawn to her energy. As I communicated with Sophie, I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in years. We exchanged texts late into the night, discussing our dreams and desires. Sophie was everything I craved: attention, validation, and intimacy. I knew I was walking a dangerous line, but the adrenaline coursed through me, making me feel alive. One evening, while Emily was out with friends, I made the impulsive decision to meet Sophie for a drink. The thought of betraying my wife sent waves of guilt crashing over me, but I brushed them aside, telling myself that I needed this. As I entered the bar, my heart raced with anticipation. Sophie was even more captivating in person, her laughter infectious. We talked for hours, and in that moment, I felt a connection I hadn't felt in years. Before I knew it, I had leaned in for a kiss, and the world around us faded away. In that fleeting moment, all my worries vanished. I felt alive, but as I drove home that night, a heavy weight settled in my chest. I had crossed a line, and I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Despite the thrill of the evening, I was still married to Emily. I loved her, but the distance between us felt insurmountable. When I returned home, I found Emily asleep on the couch, her face peaceful in the soft glow of the television. Guilt washed over me like a tidal wave. How could I betray her like this? In that moment, I realized I was running from my problems instead of facing them. I needed to confront the issues in my marriage head on. The next morning, I sat down with Emily at breakfast, my heart racing. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but my hands trembling. She looked up, concern etched on her face. "What's wrong?" she asked, pushing her plate aside. I took a deep breath, knowing I had to be honest. "I've been struggling with our intimacy issues, and I want to understand why. I want to fix this, but I also made a mistake. I met someone while trying to cope with my feelings." And I kissed her. The confession hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and ominous. Emily's face paled, and tears welled in her eyes. "How could you? After everything we've been through." Her words cut deep, and I felt the weight of my actions crash down on me. "I know I hurt you, and I'm so sorry. But I need you to understand that I was lost. I didn't know how to reach you, and instead of fighting for us, I took a wrong turn." For a moment, silence enveloped us. I could see the hurt and betrayal reflected in her eyes, but I also saw something else, a flicker of understanding. "I felt so alone too," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I didn't know how to tell you. I thought if I kept pushing you away, it would somehow make it easier. I didn't want to hurt you." As we talked, layers of our hearts began to peel away. We shared our fears, our insecurities, and the loneliness that had seeped into our marriage. I learned about the pressures Emily faced balancing her job and motherhood, while she discovered my own struggles with intimacy and connection. The conversation lasted for hours, raw and honest. We cried, we yelled, and eventually, we began to listen. Slowly, the walls that had built up between us started to crumble. It was a long and painful process, but we were finally beginning to see each other again. By the time the sun began to set, we had made a pact, a commitment to work on our marriage together. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but we were willing to put in the effort. We decided to seek couples therapy, recognizing that we needed professional help to navigate our way back to each other. As the weeks passed, we embraced the challenge. Therapy sessions opened our eyes to the patterns we had fallen into, teaching us healthier ways to communicate. We began to carve out time for each other, rediscovering the intimacy we thought was lost forever. Slowly but surely, our marriage began to transform. We laughed together again, went on dates, and even tried new activities. With every small step, we rebuilt our connection, brick by brick. The journey wasn't without setbacks, but we faced each challenge as a team, united in our desire to heal. Months later, as we celebrated our anniversary, I looked at Emily and felt a surge of gratitude. We had navigated the storm together, and although it had been a painful journey, We had emerged stronger than ever. The intimacy we had both longed for was returning, and with it, a renewed sense of love. That night, as we lay in bed, I reached for her hand, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled and squeezed it gently. "I love you," she whispered, her voice filled with warmth. "I love you too," I replied, knowing that this time we had truly found our way back to each other.